Debating foreign policy, Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton trade jabs as President Obama weighs in. Disturbing discovery. A college shooting leads investigators to evidence 2,000 miles away. Venezuela's financial crisis. The former managing director of the World Bank describes how the church can help. And military chaplains under stress. The trauma of war takes its toll on our troops' spiritual leaders. Those stories and more on EWTN News Nightly for Thursday, June 2nd, 2016. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm Brian Patrick. As Hillary Clinton blasts Donald Trump's approach to world conflicts, President Obama highlights the challenges facing the U.S. military. Chief White House correspondent and political director Lauren Ashburn reports.
Brian, arguably one of the president's biggest crises has been the administration's inability to degrade and destroy ISIS. At his speech today in Colorado, he focused on the military's successes. In dress uniform, the graduates of the Air Force Academy class of 2016 marched forward to defend and protect our country. President Obama warned of security challenges for the next generation of servicemen and women.
We face serious threats. Terrorist networks slaughter the innocent and plot attacks against our nation. Civil wars, like in Iraq, tear countries apart and create humanitarian catastrophes and havens for terrorists.
Before shaking every hand of more than 800 cadets, the president extolled the success of his foreign policy.
If you target Americans, we will find you and justice will be done and we will defend our nation.
While fighting in Fallujah, Iraq heats up today, the president reminded graduates that there are now less than 15,000 troops fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, down from 180,000. ISIS has 30% less territory and many leaders have been killed or captured, all while warning against isolationism. Meanwhile, Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump are intensifying their foreign policy attacks on each other.
He is trying to scam America the way he scammed all those people at Trump U.
They sent me a copy of the speech, and it was such lies about my foreign policy.
In a national security address today, Clinton trying to win GOP women who questioned Trump's temperament, and no Trump national security elites took aim.
Donald Trump's ideas aren't just different, they are dangerously incoherent. They're not even really ideas, just a series of bizarre rants, personal feuds, and outright lies.
In other political news, Donald Trump says he will reopen Trump University, and the RNC's Hispanic leader has resigned, citing concerns about Trump's treatment of Hispanics. Brian?
Thanks, Lauren. More politics in a moment, but first, one of the Air Force Thunderbird jets in a flyover formation over the Air Force Academy graduation crashed just moments later. We're told the pilot ejected before the crash. We don't know his condition, but there were no injuries on the ground. Incidentally, a Navy Blue Angels jet crashed in a separate incident today in Nashville. In his first public backing of the presumptive GOP nominee, House Speaker Paul Ryan says he'll vote for Donald Trump. In a newspaper column published this afternoon, Ryan writes that Trump would help us turn the ideas in this agenda into laws to help improve people's lives. He adds, that's why I'll be voting for him this fall. A Ryan spokesman calls that a formal endorsement. And other news our team is covering in today's world. Police link a gruesome discovery in Minnesota to Wednesday's campus shooting in Los Angeles. Investigators say the shooting suspect had a hit list. It included the name of a woman in Brooklyn Park, north of Minneapolis.
They indicated that this was related to the recent UCLA shooting, and they also indicated that the female that lived at this address in Brooklyn Park was on a hit list that they believe was created by the shooter in the UCLA incident.
Officers who went to that address found a woman dead inside the home. Investigators believe 38-year-old Mainak Sarkar killed her, then drove to L.A. There, he shot Professor Bill Klug, who he accused of stealing his work. Another professor was on that list, but was not harmed. Police say the suspect shot and killed himself as they swarmed the UCLA campus. He likely suffered from mental illness, and his suspicions, police say, were probably in his imagination. Her Phoenix neighbors call it shocking and heartbreaking. Police say a mother stabbed her 3 young sons to death before trying to kill herself. The youngest, just 2 months old, the others 5 and 8 years old. Their bodies were found in a closet by the woman's brother. That mother is in critical condition tonight. Autopsy results released today show Prince died of an accidental overdose of the powerful painkiller fentanyl. The 57-year-old musician was found dead April 21st at his estate near Minneapolis. The one-page report says Prince administered the drug himself. Fentanyl is a synthetic opioid 5 times more potent than heroin. Experts believe it's partly responsible for a recent surge in overdose deaths. Internal cybersecurity reports show hackers have been trying to attack the Federal Reserve since at least 2011. 4 attempts are labeled as espionage. It's unclear if any of the hackers actually broke into the Fed's security system. The Fed claims none of the cyber attack attempts should be classified as a breach. 3 Syrian men suspected of planning an attack in Dusseldorf are under arrest tonight in Germany. Prosecutors say a 4th suspect informed officials in Paris back in February and was already in custody in France. Officials say they planned for 2 suicide bombers to blow themselves up in central Dusseldorf. Other attackers were to kill as many people as possible using firearms and explosives. Protesters charged the Venezuelan presidential palace today in a rare show of defiance to that socialist administration. More than 100 people were pushed back by police in riot gear firing tear gas. Also today, the Organization of American States debated the political social crisis in Venezuela. An emergency meeting was called this week to evaluate the nation's respect for democracy. There have been nearly daily protests in recent weeks over the shortage of food and other goods. Dr. Juan Jose Daboub, former managing director of the World Bank, is now the chair of the Daboub Partnership. What led to this economic crash?
Socialism of the 21st century, as they, the Venezuelans, have labeled it, is the source of all these problems. That whole idea of making people subjects of the state, they have tried to revive it, rejuvenate it, with a lot of failure, as we can see. But that's the seed of this.
Meanwhile, it's a mess for the people of Venezuela. Now, you served as the finance minister in El Salvador. If this were your responsibility, where would you start to try to correct this?
So it is extremely important to recuperate the credibility of the country. The referendum, which is one of today's most pressing issues that needs to be resolved, and the executive branch is against it, will give a level of stability that will allow for people to continue to start to believe again in Venezuela. If I had a chance, it had to do with returning to the legal, the constitution, and recuperate the fragile state that they currently have.
So in the meantime, though, there are shortages of food, of electricity. This leads to social unrest. So what do the people in Venezuela, what risks are they facing in their everyday lives?
So they are facing personal security risks, no jobs. People are eating out of garbage cans. This is a country that has the largest reserves of oil in the world. They have 350 years worth of reserves, and people don't have food to eat. So people are suffering. There is a 700% inflation, which is the worst tax you can impose on people. So whenever you have that the majority of the population, 78%, is living under the poverty line, that in a country with that kind of wealth, it tells you that the policies of the socialism of the 21st century has not worked.
And of course, the Pope has expressed concern as a Latin American. What is the church doing? What can it do?
So the Pope has been very engaged, as we discussed last time we met. He has recently also written to the president there, and as importantly, the Episcopal Conference of Bishops in Venezuela has recently encouraged again the government to actually have a dialogue with the opposition. And I think the church has been that steady, if you want, navigation chart, compass that has tried to help the Venezuelan people and the government to actually reach some kind of dialogue. And there is also some hope coming out of the OAS, who finally has awakened. Also, the U.S. has finally awakened to the smell of coffee, if I could say it in those terms, and is looking again at trying to help a little bit.
Thank God for hope. Dr. Juan Jose Daboub, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you for inviting me.
And service members returning home from combat often suffer some form of trauma. military chaplains who serve them may also need spiritual and emotional healing. Wyatt Goolsby reports tonight from the Military Archdiocese headquarters here in Washington. Wyatt?
Brian, a military chaplain's main job is to serve in the spiritual needs of military personnel and their families. They're used to listening to their daily struggles, but what many people may not think about is how over time the chaplains themselves are left with a heavy burden.
I cry all the time. That's been the thing.
It's hard for Episcopalian Pastor John Weatherly to express his deep feelings about the destruction he saw while ministering to soldiers. Weatherly, who's now a rector in Alexandria, Virginia, served as an Army National Guard chaplain in Bosnia in 2001 and Iraq in 2006.
On our base, we would get rockets and they'd send mortars.
Chaplains don't serve in a combat role, but they often are embedded with the same unit for several months.
It is such a privilege to be a chaplain. My job was basically going to meals, and every meal would be 2 hours long. I go to breakfast and I get in these conversations. I go to lunch, I get these conversations. I go to dinner, I get these great conversations.
Weatherly says he took it all in, and it was tough. He, like so many chaplains, is left with experiences that takes years to unpack. Monsignor Stephen Rossetti, a licensed psychologist, says those experiences are not unique. For years, he's helped counsel Catholic clergy members and religious who return home after serving in war-torn countries as either chaplains or missionaries.
Our faith definitely helps people, but at the same time, it can be challenged. When you've seen so much trauma and tragedy and horror, seemingly senseless, that it does challenge your faith, and sometimes your faith will develop, if you will. It'll sort of morph a bit into, hopefully, a stronger faith.
But Rossetti says that takes time and often professional help as well as spiritual. That's why it's important to have a support group.
To be around people they love, people around family members and loved ones, to share their stories.
Weatherly agrees. Today he helps minister to other chaplains, helping them to begin the healing process. One of the other challenges for the Archdiocese for Military Services is simply having enough military chaplains. There is still a lack of priests to minister to the large number of Catholic military personnel and their families. Brian?
Wyatt Goolsby. Thank you, Wyatt. Pope Francis, conducting a 3-day retreat for priests from around the world, encourages them to show infinite mercy.
Per noi, sacerdoti e vescovi.
Francis offering a meditation on mercy at St. John Lateran Basilica today, then offering 2 other meditations at other Rome basilicas, including St. Paul outside the walls. This is one of the key events of his Holy Year of Mercy, now at its halfway mark. Coming up, more fallout from the undercover Planned Parenthood videos. And a young Iraqi burn victim adjusts to a promising new life in America. Thanks for joining us on this Thursday evening, June 2nd. I'm Brian Patrick. A new report from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention shows teen pregnancies falling to another historic low. The lead author of that study says the continued decline is really quite amazing. Last year, the birth rate for U.S. teens dropped 8%. Rates have been falling since 1991. Experts credit abstinence and positive peer influence, but also point to the prevalence of birth control. The study also found women in their 20s are having fewer children. Birth rates are rising, though, for moms in their 30s and early 40s. Overall, unmarried mothers accounted for about 40% of births. That's about the same as the year before. Representative Marsha Blackburn calls on the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services to investigate STEM Express and several abortion clinics. She's the chair of the Select Investigative Panel on Infant Lives and wants HHS to look into potential violations of federal law. The Select Panel uncovered evidence that shows STEM Express and the abortion clinics violated the HIPAA privacy rule. Blackburn says there is also evidence STEM Express may have fraudulently used invalid consent forms, misleading scientific researchers. A bill in California's state assembly would make it a crime to publish certain conversations with health care providers. That bill is the bill's sponsor is a strong backer of Planned Parenthood. Any person posting a recording or video of an interaction with an abortion facility employee or a volunteer could be prosecuted if the bill passes. Evangeline Bartz is corporate counsel and vice president of operations for Americans United for Life. What do you think is the intent of this bill?
I think pretty clearly the intent of this bill is to suppress information about what happens in abortion clinics and about potential crimes that may be taking place there.
So this is Planned Parenthood really fighting back against people like David Daleiden who have gone undercover?
Well, it certainly looks that way. I mean, if you were engaged in criminal activity, wouldn't you want there to be a law that would prohibit dissemination of that information?
It's very concerning, and I know many even secular media outlets are opposed to this. So, but I'm curious now, if someone were to post, say, one of these undercover videos on their Facebook page or something like that, under this law, could they be prosecuted?
Well, it's important to remember that this law is just in the process, the legislative process in the California legislature. So it's passed their assembly, has to go to the Senate. We don't know what the final version would be. But it seems to imply that there would be a risk of anyone who disseminates this information about conversations that take place that didn't receive the consent of all the parties involving health care providers, and that's very broadly defined, as you pointed out, with volunteers, that they could be liable under this law. So
Lila Rose of Live Action, David Daleiden, and others have gone undercover and really have unveiled or revealed some potentially criminal activity. So this law, it sounds like, could protect organizations like Planned Parenthood from being exposed.
Well, exactly. They don't want the truth about abortion itself or the truth about their conduct, which may be criminal, to come out. And that's why we've been very pleased to see the Select Investigative Panel delve into this. And this is the direct result of those videos. They've been able to uncover activities, and they have discovered that there are very likely criminal violations that have occurred with regard to obtaining proper consent, with regard to HIPAA violations, protecting patient confidentiality.
Americans United for Life's Evangeline Bartz, thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Brian.
Well, a 4-year-old boy made international headlines 9 years ago after a horrific attack in Iraq. A group of masked men poured gasoline on Yusuf's face and set him on fire. He survived. He was brought to the Los Angeles area for treatment. Look at him 9 years later.
Hey, look at you. You got so big.
Yusuf has grown in so many ways. He's been a hero for many over the years. Superman is his.
So we had a project in my English class, and so each person got to choose one superhero.
Do you identify with him?
Yeah.
In what sense?
I try to fit in with everyone.
And is that still hard for you?
Not really, because now I make friends easily.
Yusuf was just 4 years old when masked men attacked him outside his Baghdad home. Support came from across the globe, and Yusuf and his family ended up in Los Angeles, where his parents heard their son laugh and shriek for the first time in months since the attack, where strangers gathered in prayer on the beach, moving his mother to tears. He has since undergone multiple surgeries. The memory of Iraq and the evil he experienced there are all but erased.
You were saying you don't remember anything about Baghdad.
Yeah, I don't remember my family that much. Only my grandparents.
In many ways, he's just like any other teenager, obsessed with soccer, has loads of friends, and still wants to become a doctor to help others. But he knows he may not see his homeland in his own lifetime.
You've been following the news about what's happening in Iraq with ISIS and...
I feel really bad for all the people and all those kids and stuff. It's like those terrorists aren't Muslims. They're just extremists.
Yusuf and his family were granted asylum in the U.S. after the attack. They now call California home. Up next, a new movie raises questions for Catholics, what you should know before you go. And researchers discover an extraterrestrial link to King Tut. Thanks for joining us for EWTN News Nightly. I'm Brian Patrick. Promoted as a romance drama, a movie opening in theaters tomorrow has some pro-life groups calling for a boycott. Based on a best-selling novel, Me Before You, the story of Louisa and Will. Louisa is Will's caregiver after an accident leaves him paralyzed in a wheelchair. He struggles with his paralysis and eventually takes his own life. Pro-life activist Stephanie Gray, president of the ministry Love Unleashes Life, is Skyping with us from the Vancouver, Canada area. So, Stephanie, why should we boycott the film Me Before You?
Me Before You is a movie that uses death as a solution to our life problems. It advances the idea that assisted suicide and euthanasia are acceptable, and that is gravely immoral, and that's why we want not only nothing to do with the film, but we don't want to be supporting that film and seeing more people go to it.
So this is really, though, presented as a love story, a movie for lovers, maybe even a date movie. What are the dangers that you see for uninformed viewers who go to this?
Well, you know, it's dangerous because it does start as a love story. It does seem to be that it's moving from me before you to you before me. But the danger for an uninformed viewer is that although the main character, Louisa, tries really hard to preserve Will's life, the quadriplegic who wants to commit suicide, at the end of the day, he still chooses suicide, and she goes to be present at that Swiss euthanasia clinic with his family. And so an uninformed viewer might think, well, if you really try to convince someone you love them, and at the end of the day they don't want to live, then maybe it's okay to support them. And it reinforces the relativistic mindset that what I choose is my choice, and it can be different from what you choose, but that's okay. So some people will think, well, I wouldn't commit suicide, but if you will, that's your choice. I'll be there.
But for people who are suffering from a severe disability, what false messages does this film send?
The false message it sends is that there are lives unworthy of life. And that really is a phrase taken from the Nazi philosophy when they had their own euthanasia programs. And it's the idea also that movie reinforces, the storyline reinforces that our value and our worth is in what we do, what we're able to accomplish. And that's actually not true. Our dignity comes from who we are. Each of us is unrepeatable, we're irreplaceable, and whether we can function impressively by society standards or not doesn't actually have any bearing on our value. And the movie is the exact opposite message, and that's the real problem.
So what is the true loving response to situations like this?
The loving response is to celebrate being. And that's actually a phrase from the Canadian Down Syndrome Society's billboard campaign, where they have a picture of a young girl with Down syndrome and that caption, celebrate being. Because at the end of the day, we're human beings, not human doings. So when someone is suffering, we want to alleviate their suffering without eliminating them, the sufferer. So that means we be with them. Maybe that means sitting in a room listening to classical music. We bring beauty into their life.
Stephanie Gray, Love Unleashes Life. Thanks for joining us, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Egypt's former antiquities minister is back on the treasure hunt. Famed Egyptologist Zahi Hawass joins a group of experts searching the pyramids for new discoveries. They're using subatomic technology to scan the Great Pyramid of Giza. Researchers hope they can solve the pyramid's remaining mysteries.
Basically, by measuring the muon flux in different directions, we can have an idea of what is really inside the pyramid.
We hope that this technique could be accurate.
For more than a decade, he was a celebrity starring in TV documentaries. He was dismissed after the 2011 Egyptian uprising and faced corruption charges, but was later cleared. And using new technology, scientists confirm an extraterrestrial link to King Tut. They believe the metal used to make one of his daggers came from outer space. A team of Egyptian and Italian researchers say the iron blade was forged from a meteorite. The ceremonial dagger, discovered in 1925, was one of two blades buried with the ancient pharaoh's body. For the EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Brian Patrick. We leave you tonight with a look at the Olympic torch arriving in Rio de Janeiro by sea. A Brazilian surfing legend carries the flame to one of Brazil's most famous beaches. Opening ceremonies for the Summer Games in Rio set for August 5th. Good night. God bless you.